Hello there, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now I've been staying for a few days here at my woodland retreat in Oak Lodge. It's my hut just in the English woodland where I come occasionally just to relax, to recuperate and reconvene with nature. And when I come here, of course, I need the tools that any gentleman will require when he's spending some time away from civilization. And in order to keep track of the time, I wear my trusty oldest watch in my collection, and it is my Lorus Titanium field watch. And the model name, it doesn't actually have a name, but it has a model number, so there's no snappy street name to this watch, but it is without doubt the watch which I have owned for the longest. I can't tell exactly, but I believe it is between 10 and 15 years that I've had this watch in my collection, being worn on a very regular basis. And do you know what? It has come through that vast passage of time with no quibbles or issues at all. In fact, for many years, I wore this watch on a daily basis when I was an operational police officer. This was a watch I used to keep track of the time, and it was involved in a number of scuffles, in dynamic situations, and the watch never let me down. That is fair to say. So what can I tell you about this trusty, long-lasting watch, which I actually would not be without at this point in my life? Well, before we actually talk about this watch, I think we should explore the brand, because I often do this when I talk about a product and I want to review it and understand it. I like to know where it's come from, what its origin story is. And Lorus is a watch brand which, you know, most of us would be familiar with. You walk past those inexpensive high street jewellery stores and always in the window you have those various brands that you're all familiar with, Timex, Casio. And Lorus has always got a stand in those stores with quite a vast variety of watches, actually. You know, they offer watches in the dress watch category, the sports category, for females, for kids, their classic styles. You know, you name it, Lorus provides a watch in one of those categories. But did you know where Lorus comes from? Well, Lorus is actually one of the operating names of the Seiko Corporation. So Seiko, probably they're trying to pitch themselves at the higher end now. In 1982, they created Lorus with a specific intention of making that watch brand the identity of their budget level offering. So of course they didn't want their Seiko name to be associated with the cheaper end of the watch market, so they created another brand to fulfill that sort of category. Lorus have followed the path which perhaps Rolex and Tudor did many years before. You know, when you don't want to sully the name of the premium brand, you create another one which can then be your entry into the market. And Seiko have done this with other brand names as well. Names like Pulsar will be familiar to you. Again, they are platforms used by Seiko to enter the market at a lower level without damaging their brand identity. And that's where Lorus comes from. So Lorus has a labyrinthine collection of watches on their website. The website isn't the greatest if you're trying to navigate it, but there appear to be hundreds of watches. I have to say, some are very garish in nature, some I would never put on my wrist, but some are quite classically elegant, and I would like to think that this field watch certainly falls into that category. Now, one of the issues you may find if you're shopping around for this Lorus Titanium field watch is it's difficult to get your hands on it. It is still showing as being in production on the current Lorus website. There's a couple of options. You can have the sort of ivory dial as I have here, and there's a darker dial also available. But they're increasingly difficult to find if you're shopping online. Now, as I say, I've owned this watch probably approaching 15 years. So I believe I bought it in Argos, which was a catalogue shopping brand in the UK. Still exists today, but looking on their website, this watch is no longer offered. But if you do shop around, you can look on Amazon, look on eBay, you will find it out there. But the prices are climbing. I paid, I'm trying to remember, somewhere between 20 and 30 pounds for this watch. Today, the prices are creeping closer to 50. That said, even at that price, I think this remains a very desirable watch if you can get your hands on it, and for some very good reasons. Okay, so let's talk about the construction of this watch and why I think it's a pretty special piece. Let's take it off the wrist first of all. Well, what I will tell you is the principal item, or the reason why this is very relevant to the outdoors and rough and toughness, is the fact it's constructed from titanium. Now, titanium is increasingly being seen in watch production. It's obviously been in watch production for many, many years for some important reasons. Titanium has some qualities which make it highly desirable to have something made of this on your wrist. Titanium, of course, is an element within the periodic table, and it was first discovered in 1791 in the mineral-rich area of the United Kingdom, called Cornwall, where there was a lot of tin and other minerals being discovered. This is the first time that titanium was brought to our awareness. It's obviously been there since the existence of planet Earth, but one of the reasons, or many of the reasons, why titanium is desirable is its strength and its performance, because it is a high density material which is extremely light, so it has a very high tensile strength. It considerably outperforms steel in almost every way. It is stronger, it is considerably lighter, and thus it is very, very useful in the production of items like wristwatches, and it's often used in the aviation industry because of its strength coupled with its lightness. It's very desirable for the use within the manufacture of aircraft. So as well as being on your wrist, it's also up in the sky, and its strength makes it something which is very special. It's also very, very resistant to corrosion, which again, perfect for a wristwatch, makes it an ideal piece to wear on the wrist if you're likely to get it wet or expose it to the elements at any time. So now we've talked about the material this is made of, I think we need to explore what is a field watch. I've used this term many times. What is a field watch? Well, a field watch generally is considered to be a relatively small watch which is simple, utilitarian in nature, often uncluttered with other complications, and is just a watch which is a functional tool watch. All of the big brands will have a field watch within their collection. The more prominent of the more popular watches will be Rolex and their Explorer 1 range. So that's a very simple time-only piece, often considered to be the sort of granddaddy of the field watch world. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. You know, it's an Explorer, it's a field watch, it's ideal, disappears on the wrist, simply tells you the time, does the job it's meant to do. Omega, they have their Railmaster range, which again is a classic time-only field watch. Other names which spring to the mind are the Khaki range from Hamilton, and Timex have a whole collection with their Camper range, or whatever they call it. But certainly every brand will have a version of the field watch. This uncluttered, simple to read dial, it speaks to you and says it's a work watch. It's a watch which gets the job done with very little fanfare and very little fuss. And that's exactly what this little Lorus Titanium piece really delivers. So now we know more about the type of watch it is, what it's made of, the brand where it comes from. Let's flip the camera around and let us have a look at the specifics of this watch, get to see it close up. Let me tell you about its dimensions as well, because that's important, because a good field watch, it needs to be light and it needs to disappear on the wrist. And I think this little fella really rings the bell in that regard. So let me show it to you. Okay folks, so here we have it. This is the Lorus, and I'm going to give you its actual reference number now. It is the RXD425LB. What a snappy name they've decided to give this little fella, eh? And as you can see, it's quite a simplistic little watch. It's great looking, and it really does the job. Now you can see the titanium case. Basically, titanium has the appearance of a sort of silvery material with a slight grey tint to it, and you know, you wouldn't be able to tell it apart from other metals, I think, alloys at a distance, until you pick it up, because you know, there is practically no weight to this little fella at all. Now when you're looking at the dial, which is perhaps, you know, the most important part of any watch, you can see it is a sort of cream in colour, and the indices are just printed on you know, in Arabic numerals, in the normal 1 to 12, and then just below it, smaller, you've got the 24-hour system going on as well. Now the luminescence is on the hands only, no more than that. You know, all you get is that small bit of lume on both of those syringe, hour and minute hands. So very simplistic. I have been camping with this watch in the last 12 months, and in the middle of the night I've woken up in my tent, and as it often is in a tent, absolutely pitch black, and I was, even at 3 or 4 in the morning, able to decipher the time using the lume. So whilst it's somewhat pathetic, it does do its job, so no arguments with that. Now looking at the dial, you know, you can see pretty much everything there is. Lorus just under the 12, and the fact that this watch is 100-meter water resistant, an important thing to know. It gets the job done if you get it wet. Really important to have that in the back of your mind. The dial diameter is 37 millimeters, so I think that's a pretty good universal size for a field watch. You'll often find these field pieces there or thereabouts. Now the crystal that you see covering that dial is actually mineral glass. Of course, that's better than the plastic ones you'll find, and it's got a slight greeny hint to it. I don't know if you can quite see it around the edges, but because of that sort of ivory coloured dial or cream coloured dial, it does have a slight greeny essence as it sits on the piece. I think it does a good job. Now, as I said, I've owned this watch getting on for 15 years, and I can't see a scratch on that crystal at all. And let me tell you, I have not babied this watch. I have given it a right thrashing over the years, and for it to still be in such good condition, it gives you an indication of the rugged nature of this piece. Now it is 43 millimeters lug to lug, as you can see, between my thumbs, so actually weighs quite small on the wrist, and you know, it is a watch which simply disappears. Let me just release it from its NATO strap so you can see what is on the back, on the case. Not a great deal to see, just the Lorus name and some of the functional details about the piece, so nothing exciting. It's all the business is on the front, if we're being honest. That's what we're interested in, isn't it? Is the actual dial. And you can see there's a date window at 3 o'clock. It's rather a small date window, and I have to say, as a man in my 50s who does wear glasses now, the last year or so, to read, I do struggle to read this when it's at normal distance from my wrist. So, you know, you need to bear that in mind. Now, inside the watch, keeping the time, this piece is powered by a Seiko VX32 movement, digital quartz, of course, so remarkably accurate. And I have to say, I've owned this watch, as I said, nearly 15 years. It's probably had 3 or 4 batteries in it. It's lain in a drawer on 1 or 2 occasions where the battery had worn out. When I stuck that battery in, just keeps on ticking on, keeps giving you the time as you need it. What more can you ask? The crown is guarded, these little crown guards, but it's a non-screw down crown, so easy. You just pull it out, pop it out, and move it around. You know, you alter the date on that as well, quick date set. But 100 meters of water resistance, despite it not being a screw down crown. It is just a really functional little piece. It's only 8 millimeters in depth, so highly wearable, disappears on that wrist. What a belter of a little watch. So now you know more about the piece and its dimensions. Let me tell you what the wearing experience is like, because I wear this watch every time I go trekking, I go camping. If I come here to my hut and I know I'm going to be chopping wood, lighting fires, lifting things around, where there's an opportunity of risk to my watch, I'm certainly not going to wear one of my perhaps more high prestige and more expensive field watches. It sounds ridiculous, I know. You buy a field watch. Give you an example. I've got a Rolex Explorer 1. Now that is a watch which costs in excess of £5,000. It's called an Explorer, but I would be a little bit fretful if I was to bring it out here in this environment where I'm climbing trees, chopping wood, things like that, because you worry you're going to damage it. Whereas my little Lorus here, made of titanium, it's as tough as old boots. It outperforms the Rolex Explorer in every regard. If you're going to be, theoretical about it, it's more accurate because it has that digital movement inside, that quartz movement, which never loses time. Certainly hasn't lost time in the 15 years or so that I've owned this piece. I'm not worried about it. I can wear this watch all day long and have no concerns that anything's going to happen to it, it's going to get damaged. I'm not going to worry because of its modest price and the fact I've had it so long, it's never let me down so far. And another thing which is worth bearing in mind, certainly if you're comparing this thing directly with the Rolex Explorer, is it has the advantage of a date complication. Albeit a relatively small date, you have to have good eyesight to read it, but it's there. So if you're out in the woods for days on end and you lose track of time, it's always good to know you've got that date to remind you of what day of the month that it is on your wrist at least. I do think it's worth mentioning that this watch originally came on a fabric strap, which I've still got, believe it or not. I've kept it in a drawer. It was olive green in nature, and that strap was on this watch for about 12 years. I only replaced it a couple of years ago because it had literally become filthy and worn out. And I quite simply threw it onto this £3 NATO strap that I purchased from eBay. It's a rubbish strap, but you know what? It does the job just as well as that oyster bracelet on my Rolex Explorer. It keeps the watch in place on my wrist. If it gets wet, it dries off very quickly. It's made of synthetic material. It doesn't matter. This little watch is happy however you wear it on your wrist. So great advantage there. But I think it's worth talking about the pros and cons of this watch, because no watch, and I don't care what watch we're talking about, is perfect. And this is the same. This isn't. And after nearly 15 years of living with this piece, I think I'm in a good position to tell you the good points and the bad points. So let's talk about the pros to start with. The first thing in its favor is its weight. All right, it is as light as a feather. I mean, I'm not going to weigh it for you, but you can't feel it on the wrist, particularly on a small little NATO like this. It's effortless. There is no sense of the watch being there, except when you look down and you want to know the time. So from that regard, if you like your watches to be light, it's fantastic. It does that for sure. The other thing that this piece will do for you very well is its size. I think that 37mm is an ideal size for a wristwatch. Now I know there's a lot of people who will argue with that, but for me, a field watch needs to be small. It needs to disappear on the wrist, as I say. If you look at most of the field watches on the market, they're in this category. The Rolex Explorer, for instance, is it's actually billed as being 36mm. In reality, it's about 35mm. So, they're all around and about this size. So I think 37mm, as this piece is, makes it a very wearable watch, which will fit most people's wrists, certainly won't get any sense of wrist fatigue, and it's ideal for situations, as I say, where you don't want a watch to be obtrusive and getting in the way. Now, the other thing I would say in its favour is the fact 100 metres of water resistance. That means this watch can be worn in any situation, all right? You can jump in the water with it, you can go in the swimming pool, you can get wet, you can be wading through a pool trying to do some spear fishing. It doesn't matter. This watch is as water resistant as a Rolex Explorer. Let's say that. So if you want to use that as a yardstick, it's got that in common with that watch, which costs, hundreds of times more. The other thing I would say, which is important with any wristwatch, is the aesthetics. It looks good. It's comfortable on the eye. It is easy to read and it really looks the part of exactly what it is, a field watch. Right, so we've explored the pros, there must be cons. Clearly there are. And yes, and actually the cons are going to sound very familiar because two of them are the same as the pros. The size, all right? The size of this watch, 37 millimeters. I know there are people out there right now saying no man should wear a 37 millimeter watch. It's 40 or nothing for me. I hear this all the time when I review watches which are smaller than 40 millimeters. Gentlemen, you need not to weigh or to measure your manhood by the size of your wristwatch. A watch should be functional, capable and practical. That in some cases means 37 millimeters. In other cases, it may mean 45 millimeters if you really need to see a watch in low light conditions. A field watch does not need to be big. It needs to be small and inobtrusive. You know, you're not even meant to notice that it's there for most of the time. So, whilst I think it's a good thing, you might disagree and think 37 millimeters is too small. The other thing you may disagree with my pro is the fact its weight. It is absolutely without weight whatsoever, really. It is so light. This is the beauty of titanium. I know many people like to feel their watch on the wrist. They like to know it's there. There's comfort and reassurance from weight. This is why people buy watches made of platinum and things like that. With titanium, you're getting something which, for all intents and purposes, feels like plastic, but has the strength of steel. So if you don't like that feeling, this may not be the watch for you. The other thing you may not like is the luminescence. It is very poor, if existent at all. As I've said, there is an element of practicality to it. It works for me. It's worked when I've needed it, but it is barely visible. It's just enough to scrape by. And the other and final thing I would say about its cons is that brand name. Some people will not want to put a Lorus on their wrist because that is associated with low-end, budget, entry-level watches that they see in those cheap jewellery stores as they walk down the high street. For me, I don't care what the brand says. You know, there's a whole movement of people who love Casio watches because they are so practical and so modestly priced. Lorus is pretty much the same. You know, where people will refer to Casio watches as, you know, the watch enthusiasts entry level. Lorus, no different. It's right up there. It's a Seiko by another name. That's what you've got to remember. Look beyond the brand name. Okay, so there we go. That has been pretty much a roundup of my thoughts on this watch, the pros and the cons. My final observation is I can testify I have worn this field watch, this very field watch, for nearly 15 years. It's probably had about 2 or 3 batteries in it. The battery, the last one I put in this watch cost £1, and I expect it will last 5 or 6 years. So it is, without doubt, probably the most cost-effective watch I have ever owned. It is the match of most of the other pieces I own, regardless of the price point. It does the job. It's my go-to watch when I'm out in the field and I need a piece which is going to deliver. It's going to tell me the time in any situation and I don't have to worry about it. Now, what more can I say? What more endorsement can I give to a piece than what I've just said? I would say buy one if you can find one, because they seem to be in shorter and shorter supply on the open market. If you can find one for around about 50 British pounds or whatever currency wherever you live, it's a bloody bargain. And I wish I had another, but I'm pretty sure this one is going to see me out, so I don't need to buy another one. So there we go. That is my review of the Lorus Titanium field watch. I hope you've found it entertaining, interesting. If you have, you can assist me by giving this review a thumbs up. If you like the work that we're doing, click the red button, subscribe, come on the journey with us. If you want to see more of my adventure here at Oak Lodge, check out the videos on either side of this one, because I have a short series of me and my life as a frontier woodsman, and I laugh as I say that, believe me, tongue in cheek, see what I've been doing up here in the woodland. So thanks for watching today. Wear your watches with pride and passion, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.